Hello everyone, welcome to the fourth and final webinar of our four-part What is New for Operator 10 and Synexus webinar series, where we have been exploring all the new design and feature changes in version 11.24. I am Shane in technical support and I'll be conducting this webinar today. In our fourth webinar, we will be exploring the new charting section of the program. Specifically, this webinar is going to focus on the new design elements, creating charts, and modifying the properties of your charts, as well as how to customize charting data inside Operator 10 and Synexus 11.24. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up our Operator 10 program. And what you will do when you're inside the main application is you will navigate to your application ribbon and select your View tab. And by double-clicking on the Charts icon, you will launch the charting section for the program. Initially, I want to look at our application ribbon inside charting, as well as how to open existing charts and adding new charts and the various charting types you can create. So initially, when you're greeted by the charting section, you will have the option of opening an existing chart. So you can go here to the open icon, select an existing chart from your available list of charts, and click OK, and it will open any existing charts that you have created with any modifications and preferences that you've saved for that chart. When you open an existing chart, you'll see the rest of the icons light up in the application ribbon. So you'll have the ability now to go into the Properties menu to modify the properties of the chart. We have a date range section in the application ribbon, just like we do inside data views, where you'll be able to navigate to the next month or use your arrow to back to the previous month. In addition, you can select from our calendar icon here to change the date range that's being displayed. So I have a full month selected, but you could change that date range to a single day or to a 7-day. As you change that date range, it will also change the information displayed in your chart. Again, you would be able to use your arrows to navigate to the next 7 days, or use your back arrow to navigate back to the previous 7 days. And then you can even go all the way to a full calendar year. And you can customize your date range as well. So you could select custom and then use our calendar to create a beginning and an end date inside the program. We'll go back to our full month and display a full month of data. In addition, inside the application ribbon, you'll notice that we have chart type. So we have a gallery icon where you'll be able to change the type of chart that's displaying your data. So for example, I have a 2D column chart selected currently. I could select one of our 3D charts, which would be available inside the program. You can also use your scroll wheel and your mouse to zoom in on that to view your data. And then you would have other options as well. As you go down the list, you can select different charting types based on how you'd like to display your data and what kind of chart you wish to create. And from the gallery icon, you can see how easy it is to dramatically change how your charting data is displayed. And you can select from a variety of options. As you select each option, it changes the way that it displays your data. You'll also notice that I have crosshairs turned on, which allows me to navigate over my chart and select a specific data point. When I select that data point, not only does it tell me the series that I'm looking at, but it also tells me the date and the value for that particular data point. You have the ability to do this in any chart type, and you can also turn this off by selecting the Show Crosshair icon, and then it would be turned off. And you could select this icon again, and then those crosshairs would be reactivated, so you can quickly navigate and see what your value is for a specific date. We have a palette icon as well that will allow you to change the color palette of your chart. You can select different color palettes by cycling through the list and finding one that you prefer, depending on which color palette you'd like to display your data in your chart. You also have the ability to reset your zoom. So if you zoom in on data and you zoom in too closely, you can go up here to the reset zoom icon, and it will reset your chart back to the default display range. You have the ability to print an active chart, as well as we have a preview active chart capability, so you can preview your chart in a window. The nice thing from this window is you can modify some of the properties when printing out a chart inside the program. You can go to our header and footer. You can add header and footer notes to a chart. You can also modify the side, the margins, the scale, orientation. All of those can be modified inside this preview window, as well as you could select to export this as a PDF or email this as a PDF from the preview window. You also have the ability to export, so you could export a chart in any of these formats, whether it's a PDF file or you could do an image file if you wanted to drop a chart into a PowerPoint presentation. And you also have these other formats that are available to you to export. We have a Windows Management icon as well available on our application ribbon. So if I were to open up an additional chart and I had multiple charts opened up inside the program, I could select my switch to go between my different charts, and I could select my arrange icon to stack those charts, whether it's horizontally or vertically. I can arrange those charts so I can look at multiple charts at once, and that's a great tool if you want to compare data from one chart to another. Also inside the program, we're going to have the ability to create a new chart. So this is where we're going to spend most of our time today, on creating charts inside the charting section and modifying the properties of those charts to display the data that you want to see inside your chart. So the first thing you're going to do to add a new chart is select the Start New Chart icon. The nice thing about the charting section 11.24 is we've implemented Quick Create for charts as well as data views. So instead of being greeted with a properties window, you're going to immediately be greeted with a list of all your available location parameters. You can select your chart type from the top. So if you're displaying daily values, hourly values, if you're doing a monthly summary chart, a yearly summary, or a scatter chart, you can select your chart type. In this case, we're going to do a daily chart, and we're going to select the values we want to display on our chart. So I'm going to look at our effluent data. So you'll use the Allmax grid to filter and find the location parameters you wish to display data for. I want to look at some of our flow data, and then we'll proceed and look at our temperature and our temperature in Celsius for that flow data as well. By holding down your control button on your keyboard, you'll be able to go through and highlight multiple location parameters to be included in your chart. Once you select OK, that's it. It creates your chart for you. So you can see we have the two series. The location parameters that we selected are now displayed in our chart, and we can use our crosshairs to navigate those series again and see the values that are displayed at different dates along our time horizon. So when you create a new chart in charting, you're going to want to initially start defining your chart. So by defining your chart, you're going to set up the general properties and appearances of your particular chart. So once you've selected the location parameters you wish to display data for, you can go up here to the gallery icon if you'd like and start changing the display type of your chart. So if you wanted to create a bar chart, you could do that. And again, you have multiple options. You can go through and select any of these options that would be valid for the type of chart you wish to create. But when we're defining chart properties, many of our charting properties are going to be located inside the properties window. So we're going to click on the properties window, and that's going to open up the general properties window for our chart properties. Inside this window, we're going to be able to customize all the data that's inside our chart. So as we navigate, you'll notice we have a series of icons here on the left panel, and as we select these different icons, it will give us access to different features inside the properties window. Under general features, you'll essentially be able to see that this is the chart type that we selected. We could change our decimal placement by going up or down, selecting how far out we want to display our data as far as the decimal placement goes. If we're creating an hourly chart and there's some missing values, we can use undated values to display a continuous line, which we'll look at later. And then we can also name our chart from inside here. So we could create the name that our chart will be saved as. So I can put in our flow and temperature to name this chart. And then you also have another tab, which will be a continual theme throughout the properties window, is you'll have additional tabs that will allow you to modify additional options. And this tab, again, allows us to go through and select our chart type. The next tab, icon is apparent, so just like we could from the application ribbon, inside the properties window, you're also able to modify the appearance of your chart if you'd like to change the color scheme of your data lines. But the next application icon that we're going to be worried about is our series. So when you initially assign your location parameters to the chart, they're going to be created as a set of series. You can see from our legend here, we have series 1, we have series 2. That may not necessarily be a useful way to reference your data. So what you'll want to do is you'll want to rename your series so you can quickly glance at your charting data and be able to determine what parameter you're viewing data for. In order to do this, you'll go inside your series window and highlight the series that you wish to change the name for. You can see that it will also display our location name, our parameter name, and the facility that this location parameter is associated with. From the series name window down here, we can change the name of our series. So I can change that as I delete it. You'll notice that it disappears up here, and I can start typing in the name for my series. So I'm going to do flow MGD for this series, and it starts to modify the name inside the legend as well. You also have the ability from the series icon in the properties window to change the view type. So in other words, I could display a line graph, but I could also display a bar graph in a single chart, and I could use my drop down to select that. So if I were to drop down, I could select a bar, and you'll see that I have two different charting types being displayed in one single chart. So you have the ability to modify not only the name of your series in this window, but the type of chart that it's displaying the data in. And we'll go back to our line. And then I can select my series 2, and I can rename that as well. So we'll rename that for our temperature. Additionally, inside this window, you're going to have the ability to create formulas for your charting data. So if you'd like to use a formula for a particular data set, you would highlight the location parameter or the series, and then you would select the Use Formula option by check marking this box. From this formula field, you could select any of our default formulas that we have set up inside the charting section. So for example, if I just wanted to see the total monthly maximum for a particular series, I could select that, and when I selected Finish, it would modify that line, and now it's just showing a maximum value for that entire series for the month I'm displaying. I can go back to my properties, go back to my series, and I could select additional formulas, or there's a dot dot button available at the end of the formula window where you can select that and it will open up a list of all your custom formulas. So if you have a custom formula that you're applying to your data, you would be able to select that custom formula from this section inside charting. If you did not wish to use a formula, you can simply deselect this box and it will remove the formula, and when I select finish, that formula will be gone. And we will be back to our default of just displaying the actual data that's written for this time horizon. Once you've defined your series inside a chart, and you've applied any applicable formulas to the data that's being charted, you're probably most likely going to want to next proceed to name your chart. So you can do that from selecting the chart titles icon inside the properties window. If we select that, we'll be able to now add, by selecting the add button, a chart title to our chart. So you can type here in the text field, and we'll put in a name for our chart. And you can also go to the General tab. So if we look over here to our right, we have a General tab, and you would be able to change where that title is displayed. So right now I have it docked at the top of our chart, but we could select to put it at the bottom. You could select to put it to the left. You could select to put it to the right. So you have the option of modifying where that title appears. You can also change the alignment of the title if you wanted it to be to the far left, if you wanted it to be to the far right, or you could keep it at the default, which is to center it. You can also change the appearance of your title. You have the ability to modify the color of your title. So if you wanted to display that in a different color, you could also change the font. If you wanted to change the font or the size of the font, you can do all of that from this drop-down option here. After you've added your chart title, you can then proceed to modify your legend. So here's our legend, which shows us as a reference guide how to determine what lines are displaying what data. You have a legend icon here that will allow you to modify how your legend is displayed inside your chart. So if you didn't want the legend to be visible, you could get rid of it. In this case, we're going to leave it there, and we're going to modify some additional properties inside the legend. So we could change the way it displays the data in the legend. So we could go from bottom to top or top to bottom. We could also change where the legend's actually being displayed inside the chart. So we could put it in the top of the chart. We could put it in the top outside. We could do the center, so you could center your legend. You can also put it on the bottom or the bottom outside. So you can modify where your legend's being displayed inside the chart. And you can also modify how it's being displayed outside of the chart. So if you want it to be on the outside, which it currently is, or you could select to display it inside the chart itself, just depending on what your preference would be for displaying your legend. You can also change the appearance of your legend. So if you wanted to create a background color for your legend, you'd be able to select that, and you could modify that and select any background color you'd like. You also have the ability to implement some design features, so we could do gradient if you wanted to add a gradient color display to your legend, and you can even with gradient select a secondary color to be displayed inside the legend as well to change it up. So you have a lot of options inside charting to customize the display of your chart. You can also create a background image for your legend. So if you had a company logo or icon that you wanted to appear here in the legend, you could select the background image, select your dot dot button at the end of the field, and then it would allow you to navigate out to your desktop and select an image that could appear inside your legend. Once you've finished modifying the properties of your chart, you can select the Finish button and it will implement those. You can see that it modified our legend here. We now have our title for our chart. That's being displayed. If we wanted to change the appearance, we can do that without going in the Properties window. We can do it from the Application ribbon, and we can dramatically change the way we display our chart. So those are some of the initial features that you're going to implement when setting up your chart. The next thing I want to proceed to look at is going to be defining your Y and X axis and creating an hourly chart inside the charting section of Operator 10 and Synexus. So we could save this. If you want to save an existing chart, you can select Save As. We've already named it. We named it inside the Properties window. If you didn't name it inside the Properties window, you could write the name in here, or if you wanted to override the existing name, you could modify it here. So we can go ahead and we can save that, and then we can select the plus button to create a new chart. So in this example, we're going to create an hourly chart. We just created a daily chart for our flow and temperature. I want to create an hourly chart now. So I'm going to select from our chart display type and select hourly. Once we select hourly, it will start to filter down our location parameters to the hourly values that we have available inside our database for our selected facility. Keep in mind that you can display data from multiple facilities by using your drop down here in the right hand corner and displaying for all to display all of the data available, or you can filter by facility by selecting a specific facility. Once you've selected the hourly value you want to create your chart for, you can simply click OK, and it will start to create your hourly chart for you. Now, one thing to keep in mind when displaying hourly data, if there's hourly data and it's being recorded every 3 or 4 hours and it doesn't have a consistent plot of data, it won't create a 2D line graph for you initially. So you'll see when I created this hourly chart, it's not displaying any data. If we go to our scatter or point chart, you can see now I have some data points on my hourly chart. So it looks like, based on these data points, that I'm recording hourly data every 4 hours. So if I want to display this data more accurately, I would select a chart type that would better represent my data. In this case, you're going to select most likely a bar graph chart. So that will allow me to view my data. Now I can see I've created a chart that is charting my data and displaying it in a more succinct way. You can also go in the Properties menu. So if I were to go back to my 2D line graph, which currently is not displaying data, and I were to access the Properties window, you'll notice under my general icon, I can use undated values. So what this will allow me to do is it will allow me to start creating a line for all of the values that I have recorded hourly. And as I continue to add those values to the x-axis, it will start building me a line. So that's one way you can build a line graph with hourly data where you have missing gaps of values, where it's not initially going to connect the line to those data points. So I want to show you that feature for hourly, and if you hit finish, then you can see that it's changed your x-axis from, instead of displaying the time of your data, it's displaying the actual data points that you've collected. Now when you use your crosshairs to navigate, it will still tell you the time and the value that was collected at that time, but if you want to display a line graph, you'll have to use that feature in properties. But we can also just use a bar graph to display hourly data as well. So I can disable that, finish, and I can go back and change our display type very quickly. So once we've created a bar graph inside for our hourly data in our chart, the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to start defining our X and Y axis inside our charting section. So we'll go back to the properties menu, and we can customize the data that's being displayed along our y-axis, which is our vertical axis, and then our x-axis, which is our horizontal axis. We're going to do that by selecting our axis here. So by selecting our axis, it's going to bring up a list of options here to our right, and we're going to have several tabs we can work inside of our properties window to modify our options for our X and Y axis. So for example, you'll notice the way that it has the scale breaks inside our current bar graph, that it's creating duplicate values at each of those scale breaks, because it's looking at our data and it's seeing that the maximum range for my data is 8 and the minimum range is around 0. So I would want to modify this so I got a continuous representation of those numerical values along my y-axis. So in order to do that, I would be able to change my scaling options so it better displayed data along my y-axis. So initially what I would want to do is go to the tab that says Scale Options. I would want to select the axis that I want to modify data for. So in this case, we're going to be selecting the primary y-axis. And instead of letting the grid automatically determine what my grid spacing will be, I can deselect the auto option, and I can change my grid spacing to better represent how I want to display my chart. So in this case, I'm just going to change it to 1. When I do that, you can see it immediately starts changing my y-axis, and now I'm looking at a chronological order of data from 1 all the way to 8. And you could do the same thing with modifying the way it displays the time value on your x-axis as well. So I would be able to go and select my x-axis, and under my Appearance tab, I could start to modify the appearance of my x-axis, but I could also go down to my Elements tab and my Labels tab, and then under the Auto, I could change the way it's displaying the time along the x-axis here. So under my labels, if I wanted to display, instead of just the time, if I wanted to do a month day display, I could select that from my options here, and it would modify the way it's displaying the time along the x-axis as well. You also will have the ability inside this particular section of the properties window to define your visual range, which is the minimum to maximum value that is displayed along your y-axis. So to modify that, you would be able to select under the General tab, we could select our primary y-axis again, and instead of allowing it to auto-select under General, our visual range, we could manually select our whole range or our visual range to display a larger value, or in some cases a smaller value. So in this example, I would get rid of the auto, and I could create a a minimum value from 0, but I could maybe do out to 10, and then it would start based on 1 increments, it would start expanding the amount of data that's displayed along my y-axis. Or you can select auto and let the program determine that for you once you've changed your scale break options. The next thing you're going to want to do when you're defining your y and x axis is perhaps naming them. So we have the ability to do that inside this same section. So again, we're under the axis icon. We can go and navigate to our tabs here on the right, and we can select our Elements tab and start naming our X and our Y axis. So currently we don't have that enabled, but if we wanted to make the title visible, we can select that, and then it's going to default to our axis of values here, but we can modify that to our standard unit of measurement. So whatever your standard unit of measurement would be, you can select that here. I can then navigate to my drop down and do the same thing for the x-axis. So when I select the x-axis, I can then select visibility, and then I can change the name of my x-axis. So in this case, we'll select time. If I didn't want those to be enabled, I could simply unselect them and they wouldn't be displayed in the chart. Once you're done with those modifications, you can then select Finish, and it will implement those changes in your chart. So you can see that we have our visual range here of 0 through 8, with scale breaks being at a 1 whole number increment, and then we have our additional labels that we added to our y-axis and our x-axis inside the chart. And again, we could go inside our properties menu and modify the series name so it's displaying the correct series for what we're looking at. And we can select that. And it will modify our legend here in the corner. Now, one of the nice features that you can do in 11.24 is you can create constant lines as well as strips. So if you had upper and lower limits, if you had minimum and max values that you wanted to track inside your chart, you would be able to implement those through the Properties window as well. So one way we can do that is we can select our Properties window, and we can go back inside our Properties window, and you'll see we have an icon here on the left for constant bands. If we select that icon, you'll see the options that are available here on the right side in this panel. So what we would initially need to do is we would need to add a new constant, which would be a line in this case, or if we wanted to add stripes, we could add a new stripe to the chart as well. So let's add a new constant line. We're going to select Add. It's going to create a default constant line 1, which we now see as visible in the chart. We can select to rename that, so we can simply go into the name field and change the name of that. So in this case, I'm going to change that to minimum, because I'm going to alter that to show my minimum value. By selecting this box here, you can determine whether that line is shown behind your chart or whether that's shown in the front of your chart. From our calculation type, we will be able to select what type of calculated value this line is displaying. So in this case, I want to display my minimum value. So I'm going to select minimum, and that's going to look at the minimum value that's being charted, which in this case is right here, and that's where it's going to draw that line. Now I can add additional constant lines, So if I wanted to add, for example, a maximum constant line, I could select for my calculation type maximum. It's going to create a line at the maximum value that's being charted, and then I can again rename that to maximum. I also have the ability to change the appearance of my line. So if I wanted to change the color from the default that's selected, I could select another color to display that line. I can also change the line type. So from a standard line, I could do a dash dot line or any of these other options that are available from our drop-down menu. You can also change the thickness of your constant or max lines by selecting that value from this window under thickness. You can go up and down, or you can just manually write in a value. And then you have the ability inside the charting section to change the text that's displayed for your constant line. So for example, if I wanted to show this text below the line, I could select below and it would move my title to below the line, or I could deselect that and it would take it back to above the line. I could also select visible, and if I deselect visible, it will remove the title for that line. I can select also where that title is placed on the line by selecting near or far, so that will determine if that title is placed on the right or left side of the chart. And I can also modify the color for your title as well for a constant line. So I could change the title to match the actual color of the line, or select from any of these color options. And you can also change the font and text size of that line as well. Creating a strip is very similar. So if we were to go to strips and we wanted to create a visible strip, we would have to select add first. So it's going to create a default strip 1. Now you'll see that that default strip 1 is now available in our legend, as well as our constant lines currently appear in our legend as well. We can rename this if we wanted it to show, in this case, maybe this was showing a minimum or maximum range. We can rename that. So that will now appear and display in our legend. And then we can determine what area is shaded in. Now right now that strip is actually highlighting the values between my max and my min, but you have the ability from the calculation type to change that from a standard max and min to 2 standard deviations, or you can even use 3 standard deviations from the calculation type to determine where that strip is going to appear in the chart. You also have the ability under the Appearance tab under strips to change the appearance of your strip as well. So you could change the default color to another color for that strip. You can also change the way that color is displayed for the strip. So you could do a gradient color or any of these other options that are available from the drop-down menu. One of the nice things throughout the Properties menu in charting is if you create something and you later just want to remove it from the chart, but you don't want to necessarily delete the values you've selected, you can simply unselect the visible box and it will remove it. And then if you want to later go back and add that to your chart for reference, or for producing the chart for a particular month or a particular different use than the standard chart might be applicable for, you can select visible again and it will reappear in your chart. Now I'm going to deselect all of these because I want to show you how to create constant and strips using a custom value instead of the calculated standard values that are available. So we just created constants, and we just created some constant lines and some strips based on the calculation types that we have available inside the program. You can also create constant and strip lines based on your own values that you want to personally manually enter versus using only the calculation types we have available. So you'll be able to do that as well inside the chart. You'll want to first go to your axis. So again, we're going to go back to our axis icon, and then you will select from your axis icon, you'll see that over here along the right panel, we have some options for strips and constant lines down here as well. So we can go and select constant lines. We can select the axis that we want to apply this to. So in this case, our data line is our y-axis, so we'll select that. And then we can create a visible, as you can see, so it's going to create that visible constant line for us. But instead of allowing the program to define the value that's displayed, we can manually enter the value where we want that line to appear at. So I can change that to any value along the y-axis for that line to appear, and when I do that, that line will appear at that particular value. I can also change the name of that line as well and label it whatever would be applicable for that particular line that we're creating manually. And again, I could do this, I could add multiple constants and manually assign the value of where I want them to populate along my y-axis. And you have the ability of doing that as well for strips. So you could go into your strips tab here, and you could add a strip along your primary y-axis, make that visible, and then you'd be able to modify the limits for that strip by enabling your minimum and maximum values along your y-axis. So in this case, my minimum value is starting at 0, but I could change that to start at 3, and then I could modify my maximum value to start at 6, and I've created a custom strip. So this is really useful in this case where I have an upper and lower limit selected for my pH. So on my permit, my upper and lower limit, I can define those in a chart so I can chart my data and see how often I'm exceeding that upper and lower limit. And I can define those upper and lower limits again by just typing in the data here and selecting my lower limit and then selecting my upper limit. And then I'm going to create a strip that's going to be able to display my upper and lower limit on my chart. And I have the ability to also name my strip as well in the legend text. So in this case, I could define that as my upper, or I could just define that as my limits. So that would allow me to know that I'm looking at the limit range in my chart. So once you've defined that, you can select Finish, and then you can see how those appear on your chart when you're displaying your data. So you do have the ability to use our standard calculations when creating constants and strip lines in your chart, but you also have the ability of creating custom constant and strips inside the chart as well, so you can better define your data. So the next thing I want to show you in the charting section is how to add some data points, how to add some annotations, as well as we'll finish by looking at our diagrams and how we can create dual panes. So essentially, if you wanted to create two charts in one chart, you could create an extra pane for comparing data, or if there was a set of data that would complement another set of data, you could create a dual pane inside one particular chart. So next I want to go ahead and create another new chart. So we're going to create another new chart to display some values for us. Now I actually already have a chart selected, so I'm going to open an existing chart and we'll start working with that chart. So in this particular chart, I'm looking at my effluent and influent values for my solids. So you'll see from my legend here, I have some BOD5 effluent, TSS, TBSS effluent, and then I have some influent values for those same parameters all inside one chart. I've already taken the liberty of setting up the title for the chart and creating a legend inside the chart. So the first thing I want to look at is adding data points inside a chart. So if you want to add data points to your specific lines or bars inside a chart, you can do that. So if we go to the Properties menu, you'll see that we have the ability from our icons over here in the left panel to select point labels. So if we select point labels, that's going to bring up our menu over here in the right panel, and we can select visible, and what that's going to do is that's going to assign point labels to our visible series that are set up in the chart. So you can see down here for these series that I've already have assigned with point labels that it'll immediately show me the values that are populated along those particular lines of data. Now, if you want to add point labels to existing series inside your chart, you can do that quite easily by simply selecting those lines inside your chart. So for this example, I'm going to look at my influent data and I want to add some annotations for those data as well. So we're going to add some point labels for the data for my influent values as well. And I can just go through my drop-down list here at the top and select my TSS value and select visible, and it will add some point labels for those as well. And then I can do this for all the series that I have displayed in my chart. You can also select how it positions those point labels. So whether it's positioned on the outside or the center of your data, this is more pertinent if we're looking at a bar graph. So for example, if I were to finish this, you can see we now have all our point labels for all of the data that we have displayed in our chart. If we were to change our gallery type to a bar graph, you can see how those are now displayed along each series for the bar graph. And we can go inside our properties window again, and we can go back to our point labels, and we can modify the positioning of those. So by default, it's going to select an auto position, but I can put those at the top. Once I've selected my series, so in this case, I'm looking at my effluent BOD5, so I can change manually for each series or location parameter that's displayed in the chart. Once I select that from my drop-down menu, I can then go and modify where it's displayed at. So whether it's on the top, or whether it's on the top inside, or whether it's going to be in the center, or if it's going to be at the bottom inside, you can start modifying where those data point labels are being displayed at. You can also change the font, color, and size of those data point labels that are being displayed. And you also have the ability to create textual patterns behind those, as well as creating borders and other design features for those point labels. So I could create custom borders for these and select visible, and now I could outline all of those values are now being outlined in red for this particular location parameter that I selected. So that's how you can add data points to your data inside a chart. You also have the ability to add annotations inside a chart. So for example, if I wanted to add annotated notes to any of the data that's being displayed inside my chart, I can do that from the Properties menu as well. So when I go back in the Properties menu, you'll notice that we have an option down here in our left panel for annotations. If you select that option, you have the ability to add multiple annotations to your chart. This is great for presentation purposes, or if you want to add any text notes to data that's being displayed in a particular chart. So once you select the annotations icon, you'll then want to select the Add button, and it's going to ask you what type of annotation you want to create. In 11.24, you have the opportunity here to create text annotations, but you can also create image annotations. So if you were to select image annotations and select OK, it's going to create an annotation for you here in the upper left-hand corner, and then you would be able to navigate to your Content tab, and you could navigate out and select an image from your desktop. So if you wanted to incorporate an image in your annotation, you can do that inside the chart. In this case, I want to create a text annotation. So I'm going to go ahead and create a text annotation. It's going to immediately take me to the content box. That's where you can start writing in any of the relevant information that you want to appear inside your annotation. Once you've determined that, you can then start modifying where your annotation is displayed on the chart. So when you use your left button on your mouse to click on the annotation, it will let you know that you can use the control button as well as your left mouse button to navigate this annotation box around your chart. So you can see I can move that around. I can go back and I can click my starting point, and I can then start attaching that to a particular series where I want to make some annotated notes. Once you've done that, you can then use the properties options inside the properties window by navigating through these general tabs to make some adjustments to the way your annotation is displayed in the chart. So you can select where you want to position that. So if you want that to be in the left top corner, if you want to let the chart control that, you can select that, as well as you can modify again your content, and you can create the appearance. So if you wanted to modify the appearance of your actual annotation box, you can do that. We could select a background color to appear, to display behind the text. We could also select design feature for that as well. So we could do gradient design if you didn't want a full color block behind that text. And you can also select what type of annotation box appears. So you could select from the Appearance tab, you could select by default the rounded rectangle, you could select a rectangle, or you could select an ellipses. You can even modify the tail design from a tail to an arrow where it has an arrow pointing. There's a notched arrow. So there's a lot of different options that you can play around with to modify how this is displayed on your chart. Once you've completed that, you can select Finish, and it will now display your annotation inside the charting section. If you wanted to remove your annotation, you could go back into Properties, and you would be able to go back to the Annotations icon here in the left panel and simply deselect the check mark for the visible box. And it would remove that annotation. It would still save all the text and preferences for that annotation. So if you later wanted to redisplay that in a chart, you could select that, and it would redisplay that annotation for you. And again, you could add multiple annotations inside a chart by simply selecting Add to add additional annotations. The next thing I want to explore in the charting section is creating dual panes inside a single chart. So in this case, I'm going to change my chart type again to display my data. For comparison's sake, I'm going to use a sidebar 2D chart. So now I'm changing where my data is now being displayed on my y-axis and my values are being displayed on my x-axis. So say, for example, I wanted to create another panel inside this chart so I could compare my influent values with my effluent values. I would be able to do that from the Properties menu. So I would go to my Properties menu, and then I would go to my diagram icon here. Under my diagram icon, I'm going to navigate over to my Elements tab over here in the right panel, and I'm going to select under Panes, I'm going to select Add. So what that's going to do is that's now going to add a new pane inside my chart. And keep in mind, you can add multiple panes inside a chart. So if I wanted to add several panes for one particular chart to display data in several different panels, I can do that. In this case, for comparison purposes, I'm just going to create one pane. Now, once you've created a pane inside a chart, you've then got to assign the pane to your series. So your series values that are being populated inside your chart, you need to assign those to the new pane that we just created. And it will tell you that right here in the text for the blank panel that we just created. So in order to do that, you would go to your series view, like before, and you would go to your series view icon, and you would see that up here through our drop-down menu, we can see all the series that we have set up inside this particular chart. What I then need to do is I need to determine what series I want to assign. So basically I'm going to be transferring the series that are already set up in this chart from this chart to this new pane that we just created. So I want to look at all my effluent values. So I want to start off by looking at my effluent series and then selecting where I want that series to now go. So instead of that being in my default pane, I'm going to move that to the new pane I just created. And you've essentially removed that effluent BOD5 from your first panel to your second panel. And I can do that with each of my series that I want to create on my second panel. So this effluent TSS, I can assign that to my second panel as well. And then I could look at my last effluent value, my TBSS, and I can assign that to my next panel also. So now when I finish, you'll see that we essentially have two charts in one. So we've created an additional panel inside our chart so we can compare data. So in this case, I can look at all my influent values for my solids and compare those to my effluent values. Now, the nice thing when you do this is anytime you change your particular date range, it's going to change the date range for both panels. And you also have the ability to zoom in if you can't clearly see your data. So as I zoom in, I can now navigate by selecting my button to move up and down my chart over here on the left side of the chart along the y-axis. I can zoom in and start navigating and comparing data from the same time frame for different location parameters that I've created in each of my panes. And as I navigate through, and I can zoom in even more so I can more clearly define my data, I can start seeing how this would be a useful feature for comparing all of the data that I've set up inside this chart. And again, once you zoom in on your data, you can reset your zoom by selecting the Reset Zoom icon. Also, keep in mind if you wanted to add additional series to your charts, once you've created your chart, you can go to the Properties window and you can go back to your series icon up here in the left panel, and you can add additional series to an existing chart by selecting the Add button, and then it will allow you to navigate through your location parameter list and add additional series to your chart. And you would be able to also select a series and remove that from your chart inside the series window as well. But that's essentially how you would create a dual pane display chart inside a single chart. And you can see we can also save this, select our save icon, and when we close out of a chart, we will be able to go back and reopen that, and it will make any of the changes that it will save any of the changes that we've made inside our chart. So once you create your charts, be sure to save them, and you'll be able to recall them later, and you can make any modifications you'd like to them and save those changes. Or you have the ability now to just create new charts very quickly with the Add New Chart button, and by selecting the location parameters from your list and clicking OK and letting them chart the data inside the charting section. It's going to conclude our webinar on charting. So those are some of the features available to you in the charting section in Operator 10 and Synexus version 11.24.